Thanks for joining me for episode 9 of the Filled Quiver Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Jody Thibodeau, and it's my goal in each episode to help you fill your quiver with God and the great outdoors. If you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribed and following the podcast and have your notifications turned on so that you'll know whenever new content or episodes drop. If you're looking for ways to support the show, there are several ways you can do that. First, just leave us a rating and review on whatever service you're listening on. Once you've done that, go ahead and share the podcast with a couple of friends who may also be interested in the content that we have. If you're looking to support us financially, you can do that through FilledQuiverOutdoors.com by buying some Filled Quiver Outdoors swag or making a donation. And the last and personally most appreciated way which you can support the show is through prayer. Just say a quick prayer for both myself and the show. Now, as far as this episode in particular, I had the honor of having a conversation with professional angler Ott Defoe. Now, Ott has a rather long list of accolades making up his resume since entering into professional bass fishing in 2011. Just a few of these achievements include the 2011 Rookie of the Year Award through the Bassmaster Elite Series. He is the winner of the 2019 Bassmaster Classic. He was also the winner of the 2011 All-Star Week. And this year, he finished third in points for the Angler of the Year standing with Major League Fishing's Bass Pro Tour. In addition to all of this, he also has 8 other victories since becoming a pro angler. Now, we didn't discuss any of this in our conversation. Instead, just a few of the topics that we covered were his YouTube channel, specifically the series he co-hosted with his wife Jennie called JOJ, which stands for Jesus, Ott, and Jennie. While we're on the topic of YouTube, I went ahead and asked him why there wasn't a 4th part to his How to Build a Crankbait series, which I would have thought would have covered the painting process of the crankbait. I also went ahead and asked him, while we're on the topic of crankbaits, how he came up with the various names that were utilized in Rapala's OG series. Once we finished our conversation, Ott was gracious enough to play a quick round of Me Too. But before we get into the conversation with Ott and the round of Me Too, there are just a few things that have come on my radar since the last episode came out. The first of those is regarding the reintroduction of gray wolves into Colorado, which I did mention on the previous episode. Since that last episode came out, Colorado has officially reintroduced 5 gray wolves into the state. I'll have a link in the show notes section where you can go and read more about the release, but there were 5 gray wolves which were released. They were captured in Oregon, transported to Colorado before release. And there were 2 males, I believe. Let me get my notes. There were 3 males and 2 females which were released. And the goal for Colorado is to release 10 to 15 by next March, which is March of 2024, and a total of 30 to 50 over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, the reason Colorado is doing this is there was legislation which voters approved with 50.91% of votes cast to reintroduce gray wolves into the state. Believe it or not, there were actually 3 states which refused to assist Colorado with this reintroduction, including, and these states were Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. They would not allow Colorado to capture wolves which is why the 5 which were captured and released came from Oregon. But again, I'll have a link to the press release that Colorado put out about this reintroduction. I am intrigued to see what happens over the next several years in Colorado because of this reintroduction. Now, aside from this, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries is also looking to change the regulations of redfish in the state waters. Apparently, from the article I've read, they've had put 2 proposals before legislators this year, and both have been shot down. Here in my home state of South Carolina, regarding wild turkeys, the Department of Natural Resources had 1,891 completed surveys about wild turkeys. Specifically, these surveys were to try and determine the population of wild turkeys in the state and whether or not hunting regulations should be modified based on the statistics of these surveys and other actual scientific research which has been done in the state about wild turkey populations. Now, based on all of the information from the public surveys to the research completed, the Department of Natural Resources has proposed 3 changes, which will not go into effect, if passed, until 2025. Now, these 3 changes are, first, that turkey season will start later, which would have an April 10th start date, which would be statewide. Now, this particular change was proposed in 2019, but did not pass. Now, the second recommended change is a reduction in the number of days, and I'm just going to read this to make sure I get it correct. Reduction in the number of days in the spring turkey season, which we only have a spring turkey season, to a 31-day season, making the season April 10th to May 10th statewide. And the last is a reduction in the spring gobbler bag limit, which would decrease bag limit from the current 3 turkeys to 2 birds, and it would maintain the current daily limit of 1 bird. Now, they have released the results from these surveys. I don't really like the way they released the results. They've only put the in favor and opposition numbers and percentages. They did not include any neutral answers or answers queries which were left blank. And if you actually read the survey questions, it wasn't just an agree, neutral, disagree. It was strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree. So normally with your statistics, you will provide all of the data gathered so that there's no question in regard to how strong people's feelings are. I'll have a link here in the show notes to those results, but you can check it out if you want. Just 2 other quick things. Again, this one, South Carolina, the Best of South Carolina State Parks is a online voting survey for various awards to be given to different state parks in South Carolina. Put a link to that in the show notes also if you're interested. And lastly, since it's Christmas here in just a couple of days, the Audubon Christmas bird count is in full swing now. This is the 124th year of the Christmas bird count, and it runs from December 14th through January 5th. Again, there's a link in the show notes for you to check out. If you're interested in participating in one of the bird counts near where you live, you can find one or more in your area through that link on the Audubon website. This link is going to that homepage of sorts for the Christmas bird count. And on there, you can find the history of the bird count, which goes back to 1900, when the Audubon Society decided to have a more scientific approach to the traditional Christmas side hunt, which was where two groups would go out and see who could bag the most game and birds. And instead, they decided to go out and put a scientific approach to the Christmas side hunt. And instead of harvesting animals, they decided to see how many species and different birds they could count over the course of one day in an area. And it has since grown, and it's massive. If you just go to the link and I can't remember what it's called specifically, but basically look for where the different bird counts are going to be held. There's so many of them. It's just unreal. But before we get into the interview with Ott, I just want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and hope that you have a great, restful, pleasurable time enjoying this holiday with your family. And most importantly, take the time to stop, reflect, and discuss with your family, especially if you have small children, the true story of Christmas. And just take a few minutes, just open up your Bible to the book of Luke and just read the story about the birth of Jesus, and make sure that that takes precedence over all the food and gifts around the holiday. But without any further ado, I give you my conversation with professional angler Ott Defoe. Hey, Ott, I appreciate you joining me today on the Filled Quiver Outdoors podcast. And for the folks that may be listening and watching who don't keep up with professional fishing, professional bass fishing, go ahead and let them know a little bit about who you are and your claim to fame in the sports world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jody. I appreciate you. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, Ott Defoe. I live in Blaine, Tennessee. Born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I lived in East Tennessee my whole life. I fished professionally for 18-ish years or so at this point. And married to my wife Jennie for 19 years. We were married, and we've got three kids. Abby is the oldest, and we've got twins, Parker and Lizzie, that are 12. Abby's 16. But yeah, I'm just very, very thankful, very blessed to get to call professional fishing a job, and have for a number of years now. And uh, been very blessed on the water as far as competitions go too, and probably my single biggest accomplishment tournament wise would be the Bassmaster Classic win here, actually in Knoxville in 2019. So that'd probably be my single biggest win for sure.
Okay. But that's not your only win. You have, what is it? It's 9 total wins, correct?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think 5 with Bassmaster, 6 maybe. 5 or 6, somewhere in there with Bassmaster, and then yeah, so the rest of them with Major League Fishing.
Okay. And the folks can listen to other podcasts and learn more about your story with your history of fishing, but there's a couple other things that I wanted to focus on in this episode,
Okay.
and there may be other interviews that you've done that have kind of highlighted on this. I just haven't been able to find them.
Yeah.
But you and your wife actually do a series on YouTube called JOJ, Jesus, Ott,
That's
and
right.
Jennie.
Yeah.
And I've started watching. I'm still working on playing catch up. I'll watch some, then I'll miss a few weeks, and I'll try and play catch up and watch a few.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting show. It's basically, to me, it seems like it's a devotional that you guys do.
hmm
Um, why did you guys decide to start that?
Yeah. We we started it with honestly our story and how we met and how we got to the point of where we're at in life, of having a job as a professional angler and I would share my testimony in different places where I spoke, different churches and wild game dinners and that kind of stuff, and people were like, "Man, that's just," and I wouldn't share all of it as much as I could get in a 30 or 45-minute talk or something, but people were like, "Man, it's just you all have a neat story. Y'all should you should tell that really in its full length." And it's not our story; it's what God's done in our life and the way that He has put everything into place and different situations and different times in our life. So that was kind of the start of it. And it was funny because Jenny and I had both had that thought of doing something like that, of having of using our current fishing platform, but for something greater than just fishing tips and that kind of stuff. And we had both individually had those thoughts, but not really talked about it a lot, to be quite honest. Until finally, I think the Holy Spirit had just put it on us both enough that we were like, I think there's something we're supposed to be doing with this, and that was kind of when we decided to do it, and even with JOJ, like the way that it has, the way that we found the guy who came and shoots it for us and edits it, and even just so much so as putting that right person in our life at the right time, um, was a major blessing and certainly a way that God worked through that. But so at first, JOJ started as our story and kind of how we met and dated in high school, and all the things that we have been through together to this point in life, and then rolled it into now. Yes, it's essentially, I would call it a weekly devotional. This year we have been working out of a devotional book, and each Sunday we have a new episode of that, and we've been going through that devotional and sharing it. And it's a lot of fun. We certainly enjoy it, and feel like it's reaching people that we otherwise wouldn't have a chance to.
Okay. Yeah, and I know you said you're going through a devotional book
Mhm.
now. What outside of the devotional, or just some of the other topics that you guys have discussed, is there any one that sticks out in mind? Is maybe not necessarily your favorite, but one that you think probably has more meaning to you, or
Yeah, that's a good question. When you asked one that stuck out in my mind, last year and part of the year before, we would do like a word of the month, and so we would take a word from scripture or a word that we think of, whether that's courage or strength or faith or there was a lot of different words that we did that series on, and the one that just sticks out in my mind honestly when you first said that is omni. And we did that on the different omni qualities of God, and I think it sticks out because most of them were really hard for us to pronounce, and I had to Google the correct way to say omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent, so to make sure that we got all of God's qualities pronounced the right way, and His all being, kind of what omni itself by itself means. So yeah, He's all powerful. He's all present. He's all knowing. So those things. But yeah, the Omni was definitely a fun month to work through.
okay, yeah, and I know I've learned myself from listening to them, which it may seem trivial to some or insignificant to some, but one of the things that I remember, uh, it's not even necessarily scriptural, but I guess it still pertains to the Bible. Was I think it was in August. It was a few weeks ago. Well, more than a few weeks ago. But the one where y'all were talking about the rainbow,
Yes,
and Jenny brought up that the God's rainbow has 7 colors, and the
correct.
pride flag has 6, and I never
Right.
knew that.
I didn't
But
either. Yeah.
so there's all kinds of things that you can learn from watching JOJ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I learned that myself when we were talking about it that day filming it. Yeah, I did not know, that that they had a slightly different rainbow that they used as their, as their symbol, and that's, um, yeah, that was one that was definitely, I learned in that situation myself as well.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the other things I was going to ask you about. You've actually already mentioned as far as the videoing and the editing. I was
Mhm.
just curious if that was something that you did yourself, that you had an interest in, or if you outsourced it.
Yeah, yeah, no, we definitely outsource all of that. Pretty much anything you see on our YouTube channel, whether that's JOJ or that's any of the fishing content or anything about the most complex thing I personally am going to edit will be a reel on Instagram, about a minute, 90 seconds tops. That's about the extent of my editing capacity. Yeah, to try to do anything longer than that, it's not Jennie or I. Um, for both of us, mentally, I don't think we could. Number one, we're not very talented at it either. And then there's so much else going on to sit in front of a computer for the amount of time that it takes to make something look good. Yeah, it's something that neither one of us have the desire or the talent to do very well.
Oh, okay, I got you. And like I said, I enjoy watching the episodes. I appreciate that you guys do that and that you're willing to do that. And we'll put a link in the show notes for
Thank you.
anybody
I
who's not
appreciate it.
familiar with it. That way they can check it out as well. Because, like I say, I've learned from it. I've learned more than just the number of colors in a rainbow,
Yeah,
but I was just using that as an example because it was just
yeah.
the first thing that came to mind. But aside from JOJ, I've seen that you have many, many other videos. There's multiple series that you have that
Mhm,
you put new episodes about regularly,
mhm.
and some of those are you have a casting series, a hook set series, technique of the month, your pick three, and then your pick two more.
Mhm.
um, I'm personally new to bass fishing. Growing up, with us, if we went fishing, it was down to the pay pond for catfish, or
Okay.
maybe we went to the lake or family's pond for bluegill.
Yeah.
But I've learned a lot from watching them. But of the different series that you have, which one or would you say is your favorite to record and to do?
Yeah. The stuff we do here in the garage, um, at the time, it's not usually real exciting,
Mhm.
to be quite honest, because it'd be a lot more fun to be out on the river catching fish, and showing a bait or showing how to fish something and that kind of stuff. But it's funny because a lot of that stuff we do here in the garage, I hear exactly what you just said, that stuff where I'm sitting talking and explaining something, um, is what a lot of people like to hear, and a lot of people are able to take that information and then go apply it to their own fishing. Would they be entertained by watching me catch a fish doing what I'm talking about? Yeah, sure, but does it actually educate them any better? No, and that's what's been interesting about it. Probably one of the recent ones that I think has been my favorite was going through that hook set series. That was one that I had I'd kind of had the thought of and a way to help people, to help people understand how to set the hook properly and how it's different, how it varies for different bait styles and stuff. And that hook setting, and we're actually going to do one. I think when we record, maybe next week, we're going to be recording some more stuff here. We might even do one on actually fighting fish and actually, trying to land fish, because if you go fishing and you don't set the hook right or you don't fight the fish right, it still ain't a caught fish. I mean, you can do some of those things wrong and still get the fish in the boat, but if you're talking about going out on the water and having 10 or 12 bites and you only land 3 or 4 of them versus going out on the water and having 10 or 12 bites and you land 9 or 10 of them, that's a big difference in the end of the day at truly how good of a day you felt like it was. So, there's the hardest part is tricking the fish to bite most of the time, but that is actually only half the battle.
Okay. Yeah, and I know in one of the episodes earlier this year, it was I think it was the pick three. Might have been one of the pick two more. But you were talking about with the crankbaits. You made a reference to one of yours from the OG series,
Okay.
and that how they're silent.
Hmm.
And I just wasn't thinking about it at the time. I was talking about it with a guy at work that fishes a good bit also, and he said he had watched it, and he was bringing up. He said, "I wonder why he likes the prefers silent." So I'm just going to ask you, what? Why do you have a preference for the silent crankbaits over one with rattles?
Yeah, for me, and I've got one here hanging. This is actually this would be a cool thing to show on there. I think got some dogs running in here in the background, um, but this is actually one of the first. Hey, buddy, go upstairs. Go upstairs. Um, that's one of the first OGs prototype that I had built. That actually I've got it hanging here on the net that I've got a bunch of stuff on. But this bait is silent. Doesn't have any rattles in it or anything. Go upstairs. Go on. But if you take that bait, it's got hooks, it's got split rings, it's got all the hardware on it. Just shaking it back and forth the way it would swim in the water, it makes a lot of noise. Honestly, on its
Hmm.
own, it's yeah, it doesn't have its own rattle, but it's swimming through the water. There's a lot of sound that comes off of that thing anyway. I I've I've never threw a cast that much for shad, but I've snagged shad and I've had them in the water before. You know what they don't do when you shake them? They don't rattle.
Yeah.
So to me personally, like why I would ever want, especially a shad colored bait, go upstairs. Go on. Why I would ever want a shad colored bait to rattle? Like for me, I just could never wrap my brain around it personally. And then I've fished a lot of baits growing up, shad rap being one of them, that were silent baits that I caught lots and lots and lots of bass on, and would catch fish around other people fishing similar baits that did have rattles that weren't catching as many as I did. So just history in itself for me, I just saw more times than not that a non-rattling bait caught more fish. Now I will say, if you're trying to imitate crawfish, I do think a rattle can have benefits, especially like a wiggle wart style bait, something like that. And I've caught a lot of fish on baits with rattles. A lot of the DT series has a low rattle. It's not a real loud. It's not a bunch of BBs or something, but it's not that you can't catch fish on a rattling bait. Obviously, a lot of fish have been caught on a rattling bait. I've caught piles of fish on a rattle trap, so it does work. But if I'm going to design a bait and it's going to have my name on it, as far as a crankbait, especially a flat sided crankbait, it probably ain't going to have rattles in it.
Okay. And just kind of piggybacking off of this in a roundabout way, I think that everything we do for a reason.
Hmm.
And that's the reason that yours are silent.
Hmm.
But going off from that, we'll also go ahead and talk about the OG series. I just wanted to ask you something about it, as far as the naming
Yeah.
of the Rocco. Where did that name come from?
Yeah. So when we come up with the OG series, just the family as a whole, we were kind of playing a double role with the name OG being Ott's Garage, where I'm sitting at right now for one, but also the term of OG being like the original gangster, so kind of being being the OG of something, and so with that in mind, that was where Rapala had, like, they came up with this list of names that were kind of gangstery type of names. Slim, Tiny, Rocco, that type of stuff was on those on that list of names. So that was Rocco was one
Okay.
on there. And when we came with Square Bill, we were like, we need a tough kind of excuse me, a tough name like that. And Rocco seemed to fit the bill pretty good.
Okay. And just going to an extent with that, just kind of
Hmm.
piggybacking even more with the Ott. Now, if anybody's looked into you, they know Ott is not your actual name.
Yep. Amen.
It's more of just a nickname.
Yep, that's
And
right.
now, what's the backstory on that?
Well, the backstory is nobody in my immediate family growing up, my mom and dad, my brother, None of us go by our legal names. None of us. And so my dad is Alan Roy. He goes by Bud. My mom is Erica Elfrida. She goes by Fred, or her sisters used to call her Freddie, and then they just shortened it to Fred. My brother is Charles Lee Allen. He goes by Sonny, and I'm Arthur Frederick and go by Ott. Mine in particular, I had a great uncle whose name was Arthur, but his nickname was Ott, and that's who I'm named after, my great uncle. But yeah, nobody in my in my immediate family growing up went by their name.
Okay. And so with the nickname with the Ott, that's where the logo that you have of an
Mhm.
otter came from.
Yeah.
Now, there are a couple of things about that. Now, I'm assuming that just because of the nickname, that's how you came up with the logo
Yeah, yeah,
idea.
it absolutely was. Yeah, and that's honestly when I was in middle school, high school, but I feel like middle school even people would call me Otter. Like, I mean, that was just I think it's a pretty natural, name. And I fished then, on fish tournaments and stuff, but it wasn't like River Otter. It was just Otter, just kind of a funny name to, to if your name's Odd, that they're gonna add on to it a little bit. But yeah, so I mean, even starting in middle school, people had called me Otter, and then when we were coming up with a logo, and that was it. Honestly, was I think 2011 was when I first had a logo. I think is when it was. That was when we first, branding wise and that kind of stuff, understood the need of having a logo, and that otter was an obvious fit. The first one was not very good, to be quite honest. It looked. I never personally watched this show, and I'm not recommending that anybody watch the show. But if you had ever saw on South Park, there was a character on there called Mr. Hanky, I think. Um, that was very much what my first otter logo looked like. That was really similar to that, but we since then got a much more realistic looking otter, and it's a lot better than what we started with.
Okay. Yeah, and for those not familiar, they can go on your website and they can see it. And
Mhm.
I guess the one that I first saw was the one where he's laying on his back holding a fishing pole.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I also like the one that you use with the JOJ where he's
yeah.
holding. I think he's holding a Bible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And but yeah, those are cool. So for anybody
yeah.
listening or watching, go to Ott's YouTube channel and website, and you can check out the logo. And you do sell merchandise still
Mhm.
with the logo on it, don't you?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, upstairs in the garage right here, we've got all our merch and stuff. Got hats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, all kind of stuff. And yeah, we've got a couple of different logos too as well. We've got the ones with the otter. We've got a couple versions of it, and then also got the one. It's like a ODF. It's got the state of Tennessee and the TriStar for the state of Tennessee and stuff in it too. So yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool. And um, just moving on into another area I wanted to ask you several questions about, and that goes back again to the lures
Mhm.
with the crankbaits. Now, those who know you and know about you, they
Yeah.
know that you didn't just help design the OG series.
Mhm.
You actually made one, and
Mhm.
then that's what they're based off of, correct?
Yes, that's right. The very first one, Slim, which is what that was one of the first ones of that actually was an existing Rapala body that I was modifying and taking their lip out, putting a new lip in, changing the line tie, all that kind of stuff. So it was an existing bait that was actually discontinued, and it was a decent bait, like the way it was designed and the lip it had and stuff. It was decent, but changing it to what I did and change it to the circuit board wheel. All those things really made that bait come to life. So the first one truly was kind of a modification, but I did that solely on my own. I had those baits and had modified a bunch of them, and then yeah, when we when Rapala was really kind of getting into the idea of doing it, I sent them baits, I sent them bills, I sent them all the stuff that I had done and had modified, and that was where Slim came from. The rest of the baits, Tiny especially. Tiny was a bait that I had made personally, I don't know, 15 years ago, and a bait that I had caught lots and lots of fish on, and had a few different renditions of it. I had an extremely shallow one. I had one that's basically like the regular tiny that's out now. I had one that's like deep tiny, that just got released this year. That should be that I've already had some pictures of and seen. I think it's in some stores and will be and more here real soon. But Rocco was one that was a honestly a new design. It was close to stuff I had made, but for me personally, round body baits were very hard for me to make. I don't have a turner or anything like that, so flat baits are easy, but round baits are really difficult. But it was kind of a new one for all of us. I had, just took some baits and kind of modified and some of this and some of that to get what we wanted. But yeah, a lot of the flat sided baits, that stuff that yeah, it's cool to take something that I could cut out in here on some sheets of balsa and a scroll saw and a drill press and send it to manufacturers such as Rapala and get some baits back from them.
Okay. So anybody listening and watching, they can buy a Rapala from
Hmm.
the OG series and essentially have a lure that you designed. Now
Yeah.
let's talk about some lures that they can't necessarily buy that you have a hand in making. Now you've been making your own crankbaits since high school,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Now, how did you get into that?
Yeah. For me getting into it, the guy that I grew up fishing the most with, Jason Nichols is his name. Still a good friend of mine. And I started fishing with Jason, I think, when I was maybe 12 years old or so. His dad, Steve Nichols, he's passed away several years ago now, but Steve Nichols made a lot of baits. He was a custom crankbait maker. Made a lot of baits, well known in this area. And Mr. Nichols was who taught me how to make crankbaits, and he showed me his way of doing it and the the method that he used. And he was very they were handmade baits. The only machinery he used was a scroll saw to cut the outline of the bait out. He didn't use a router. He didn't use a tumbler to sandal. He didn't even use a drill press. He would drill them by freehand. I mean, he was extremely handmade crankbaits. But he showed me, he taught me how he made baits, and other bait builders in this area. I would talk to some, and how do you do this? How do you do that? Craig Powers is one who has made a lot of baits and was good at for doing as much of it by hand. Excuse me, for doing as much of it by hand. Very good at making a lot of baits quickly. Yeah, so those, but Mr. Nichols, Steve Nichols was certainly who gave me my start in it and showed me you know, kind of got my feet wet with it.
Okay. And you still make them now, right?
Yeah, I still make a few. I don't, just time wise, I don't make a whole bunch each year. But I definitely still do still make a few. And, we did a YouTube series on how to make a crankbait. And that was a fun process to go through. I think it ended up being a 3-part series, and this is one of those. I've got them hanging here, but yeah, that was a fun build and really to help try to help show people what all goes into to making a crankbait. And it's if you've got the right setup, which honestly is a scroll saw, a drill press, and a router. If you've got those 3 items, you can make quite a few baits pretty easily. It's not terribly hard. Um, I have never been a painter. I've always had buddies that are painters, and they always do all that for me. So that's always been kind of a thing that I've just it's like by the time I get it to this point, I am done with it. Like I want to send it to somewhere else and get the thing back ready to fish. And that's kind of always been my deal. So I would like to paint, but I'd like to make a whole batch of them and go send them off, get them painted.
Yeah, because that was actually going to be my next question. Because in your 3-part series, I watched it because I've got access to everything except, well, I have a router. I just don't have a router table, and
Okay, yeah,
I'm going to attempt it at some point
yeah,
to make my own, and probably fail miserably. But I noticed that was the one thing that you didn't cover was the painting and the
hmm
finishing process. And I
Yeah.
was going to ask you what your preferred method was, which apparently is somebody else.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's I talked about it with the guy who shoots that part of our content stuff, JD Blackburn is his name, about doing that, and I like the idea of it, but to truly properly film painting a bait, like you got to have a bait in every stage of it. So you got to have one that's raw wood, then you got to have one that's sealed, then you got to have one that's primered, then you got to have one with the first coat. Like you got to have, there's 6 or 8, whatever many steps in doing a bait. You'd have to have a bait in every step so that you can go in and film it and be like, okay, I'm going to shoot this step and not have to wait 6 hours to film the next step.
right.
So we've not took that on at this point yet because it would be a pain, honestly, to be able to try to shoot that in a day's time.
I got you. And now, as far as these go, I think you mentioned in the video, I think this is where I saw it, that you could do about 10 in an hour.
Yeah, and that's with any of that kind of stuff, and when you're trying to mass produce or just multiply, you're not going to cut the bait out and then router the bait and then drill the bait and then cut the bill slot and then start gluing stuff into one bait. Like if you want to make several of them quickly, you want to cut out. Just say you're going to do a dozen. You want to cut out a dozen. Then you want to router a dozen. Then you want to drill a dozen. Then you want to cut it. So doing them all as a batch is number one. It's going to be quicker, but number two, you're going to do everything better because if you do this step and then you move to that step, then you move to that step, then you move to that step. When you go to do the third one, it's like it's all new every single time. Where if you do it as a batch, you're going to make them all a little bit more consistent doing it that way.
Okay. Yeah, and I know Bassmaster has an online article. It's several years old now, but folks can still go and find it. But
Mm,
it actually has a picture that it looks like it's taped to your workbench, but
probably was.
it's your old price sheet from when you first started making these, and a
Yeah,
whole list of color options,
yeah,
and the price was
yeah.
$10. Now, if you were to
$10.
sell these today, what would an Ott Defoe handmade crankbait cost somebody?
It's pretty spot on, honestly. I mean, you can go to Bass Pro and get OGs for $9.99 or $8.99. If you catch them on sale, might even be less than that. I don't have a funny thing on that. When they first come out, my mother-in-law, she's a very sweet lady, and I highly doubt she'll ever listen to this. So I can say most of this exactly how I want to. She it's Ott's Garage, and it's the branding of it and everything. She, honest to goodness, thought I made them all right over here in the garage. She honestly thought that at first, and so Jenny had to explain to her that no, Mom, he's not at home, all hours of the day making thousands of baits that they're selling all across the country. So that was the funny part. But yeah, I, I just don't. I don't make any of them to sell. It's pretty much a thing I do for buddies or something. It's pretty much the only people that get any of them anymore. Because it and multiple reasons for that, but time being a big part of it, and obviously with my association with Rapala, that wouldn't be a bite in the hand that feeds you like that. Wouldn't be real smart either. Maybe
Right.
maybe that'll be a retirement plan when I'm old and gray headed and nobody wants me to promote anything for them anymore. I'll make a few baits then. But I have seen a few on eBay that are legitimately mine. And going back to the painting deal,
Hmm.
so like I was talking about, back in those days, again, the guy who painted nearly everything that I made, Gordon Monroe is his name, and he still does some custom painting and stuff, I think. But Gordon was who painted the vast majority of my baits. Well, I broke. I mean, I didn't have the money to pay him to paint a bunch of them, so I would barter it out with him. So for
Hmm.
every 2 baits I got painted, he got a bait out of the deal.
Okay.
To be honest, he's still got more of them than I have, or at least did have. And I sold a few in shops here and there and stuff, and people would buy some at fishing shows and different things like that. So, I sold a few. I obviously was never big time and never made thousands of baits that were sold or anything. But there certainly are some of them out there floating around that people have that are baits that I made, and I'm sure some of them have been repainted at some point or something. But yeah, I'll see a picture of one here and there. It's pretty neat. There's a Facebook page. It's like Wood Bait Nation,
Hmm.
um, and I'll see some on there on occasion. People will comment about them being mine and stuff.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: since you went pro, have you ever used any of them that you made in a tournament?
Oh yeah, I've used a bunch of them I've made in different tournaments. The first my first year on the Elite Series, I won the All Star event down in Alabama. It was like a postseason event. Part of it we fished up on Lake Jordan, part of it on the Alabama River. That part on Lake Jordan, I caught a bunch of fish on one of my baits it's what tiny is. It was tiny. It was just I called it something different at that point in time, but yeah, it was. I caught a bunch of fish in that particular tournament that wasn't the winning part of the tournament, but I won that tournament, and part of those fish were caught on tiny.
Okay. And just talking about that, talking about fishing in the tournaments and using a crankbait, whether it's one that you made
Hmm.
or one of the Rapalas from your OG series.
Hmm.
Um, what if you're using a particular uh, tackle and you're just not having any luck? Usually, how long do you go before you either switch out what you're using,
Hmm.
and if something's not working, do you usually switch to something completely different, or just switch up colors? What are you more inclined to do?
Yeah, I'm more times than not. Like if I go wherever, whether it's somewhere around here or I go to Florida or wherever, I'm gonna have because I've fished all across the country for a number of years at this point in time, and so I go to any body of water across the country at this point in time. When I pull up, I'm going to assess the situation, watercolor, water temperature, time of year, da 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 da, and I'm going to get out 6 or 8 things. Maybe maybe a jig, maybe 2 or 3 different crankbaits, different depths, maybe a jerk bait, maybe a shaky head, maybe a top water. I'm gonna have out 6 or 8 different things to start with. More times than not, I'm not gonna dig a whole bunch more random stuff out of the rod box so much as I'm gonna use these 2 rods out here on the main lake. And then I'm gonna go back in a cove and I'm gonna pick up these 2 rods. And then I'm gonna go, part of the way up the creek and fish these 2 rods. Like I'm gonna have different baits that I think can fit multiple scenarios that are going on. And then I'm gonna go try to find other areas, parts of the lake that one of these scenarios is working in is kind of my thing more so than, I'm gonna pull one rod out, try that one bait or that one technique for 30 minutes or an hour, put it up and get something else out necessarily. So I'm gonna have 6 or 8 different things out and I'm gonna try 2 or 3 patterns. Obviously you can't necessarily at one point in time, but I may try one for 10 minutes and then go try a completely different pattern for the next 20 or 30 minutes and try something else for 5 minutes and just to see if I can get something to stick. It's kind of more of the throwing everything at the wall and see if something sticks kind of program than okay, I'm gonna try this technique for 2 hours and see if something happens.
Okay. And now that we've talked about faith, we'll kind of use this as a segue into your faith. Um, Now, I will say that this is something that I noticed, and when I first noticed it earlier this year, I actually went back through all the headshots of all the pro anglers to see if you were the only one
Okay.
that fit this bill. But on your jersey,
Mhm.
just below your name, you have a Bible verse,
Yep.
and I don't know if, and you can tell me this, if the placement there was intentional so that it
Mhm.
would be in every headshot. Because I have seen on other guys' jerseys where they have a scripture reference, it's just not located where it would be in every single headshot unless they're
Right.
holding something in front of it. But yours is, if I wrote this down correctly, is John 15:16.
John 15, 16. Yep.
And what's the significance of that verse to you?
Yeah, it's Jesus speaking to his disciples, and it says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you would go and bear fruit, and that that fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give to you." And Jesus speaking that to his disciples, at us being Christians, were to be, a lot for Jesus on this earth. We're to be his disciples. We're to tell other people about him. That's our calling. Once we've come to Christ and to be and as a Christian, that's what we're supposed to do. And that for me, once I realized that fishing was more than fishing, that God was giving me a platform to be able to use to reach other people for him. That verse gained a lot of significance, honestly, in my life. The fact that, I realized by reading that I didn't choose him. He chose me. He knew what I was going to do before I knew what I was going to do. He knew what I was going to do before my parents knew they were going to have me. He had already chose me and appointed me at that point in time to go and bear fruit for him. And that was, for me, when I read that verse with that understanding. I had read it before. Oh, okay, it's whatever. Moved on. It's that deal when you read something at the right time and find the application in your life, that it really sticks with you. And that was that for me, John. When I read that, I don't remember exactly what year that was, because it's been there for over a decade at this point. But I was like, that's that's my verse. That's the one right there that's going on my jersey. And the placement wise, I wanted it as front and center, or as relevant as I could possibly get it. And they're going to put your name. That your name is as high as something that you can pick. I think, other than you get like the league logo on one side, and then the spot. I think the only thing above your name is the league logo. I believe is what
Okay.
it is. So the next closest place I could put something was right below my name. And so for us,
Okay.
that's a non-negotiable spot. That's what goes there.
Okay. And if you don't mind, just share your testimony of how you came to have a relationship with Christ.
Absolutely, yeah. I was 12 or 13 years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I can remember where I was standing. When I prayed to accept Christ. And for me, we had grew up going. I didn't I didn't grow up, I should say, going to church every weekend or regularly. Honestly, but the time I was probably 10 years old or so, we started. My mom and dad and brother that's a couple years older. We started going to church regularly, and started off going to a Methodist church and went there for a couple of years, and then we moved to a Baptist church. And after just a couple Sundays there, a couple deacons from that church that actually came to the house just to do a visit. And my brother, like I said, I've got a brother that's a couple years older than a brother that's a lot older as well. Um, but neither my brother, Sonny, and I had neither one ever been saved or anything. And those deacons that came, and they'd ask us, if we had been saved, and they shared the gospel with us and told us exactly, how exactly what we needed to do to be saved at that point. And both of us that day, right there standing in front of the garage at mom and dad's house, prayed to receive Christ, and then followed through with baptism shortly after that. So that was that was a very special time. And I'm thankful for those deacons, and I'm thankful for their service to that church at that point in time. And I'm fruit because of their service, and because of what Jesus had called them to do. So I'm very thankful for them.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
Mhm.
And I know you've mentioned in other episodes and or other podcasts, and I think you mentioned earlier also as far as being able to go out and speak and share the gospel with
Mhm.
folks. You are available, obviously, around your schedule, dependent on the schedule with
Mhm.
tournaments and all, to come and speak. If somebody wanted to have you come and speak at either their men's dinner or wild game
Mhm.
banquet or their church, how would they go about doing that? What's the best way to get in touch with you to try and schedule something?
Yeah, probably email is the easiest way to do that. And it's just like my name, O Defoe 17 @gmail.com. It's probably the easiest way to get in touch with that. So just
Okay.
all letters ODEFOE numbers 17 @gmail.com.
Okay, and I'll include that as in the note section
Okay.
of this episode as well. But um, now that we've finished our discussion, if you don't mind, we'll go into the little segment that I've started with guests called "Me Too,"
Okay.
and the whole purpose of this is just to help the listeners, the audience, to see just how much in common they have with you
Okay.
as interest and whatnot. Most of the questions are from the outdoor world. And for those who have been keeping up with the show, we're going to be doing it a little bit different, starting with Ott. And instead of me just asking the same list of questions over and over, I will have about five or so that will be the same amongst all the guests.
Okay.
But there will be some specific to whatever the guest specialty is. Obviously, in your case, it's going to be fishing related questions.
Okay.
But then I'm going to also let you pick a couple of questions. I have a list of questions, and once we get to that point, I'll just let you give me a couple of numbers, and we'll see what you end up having to answer. So
Sounds
if
good.
you're ready, we'll go ahead and dive into it.
Let's do it.
All right. So the first question is, what is your favorite Bible story?
My favorite Bible story. Um, Probably a lot of the stuff with the disciples is pretty fun, and I like the book of Job, um, but honestly, probably uh, Jesus walking on the water. That's probably my coolest one because I've been on places that were very rough, and so to see him for him to walk on the water like that, that's probably my favorite one. And then I think um, the that wasn't that's probably my favorite one. But then also I think it was the other storm where he was in the boat with them and he just told them, he just told the waters to be still, and he rebukes the disciples and he's like, "You have little faith. Oh, you have little faith." That's probably one of my favorite one-liners. But I think him Jesus walking on the water is probably, yeah, that's probably my favorite one.
Okay. As far as places to visit that have to do with the outdoors or nature or God's creation in general,
Hmm.
what, such as like a state park, museum, zoo, um, what is the favorite that you've ever been to? What would you say stands out as your favorite venue, outdoor venue that you've ever been able to visit?
Yeah. Um, hmm. I've been in some really cool places, ain't no doubt. Lake Havasu in Arizona is really cool. Just because it's desert, but then there's this lake there, and it's so very different from East Tennessee. Um, but man, that there's nowhere like home. Like a sunrise right down here at the mouth of this creek where it meets the river, and the sun comes up over the upper end of this island right over here. And especially this time of year, the way the sunrises will be and how colorful they'll be, or we get just a little bit later in the year. I've got some really cool pictures of what it looks like right down here behind the house, and I'm gone so much that, man, I love it. I love to be home, and that sitting down there, and as I'm in my camo days, I duck hunted this morning down here on the river behind the house. That's a cool place, right down there.
I
Not
got you.
bragging.
Yeah.
God, we're only here because of everything God did for us to be able to live here on this piece of property. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I like that one right down there as well as anywhere I've been in the world.
I got you. Well, now what is one place that you have never been that you would like to go and experience?
Yeah. Hmm, Somewhere I've never been, I would like to experience. Uh, Probably, I don't like the idea of traveling out of the country anymore. Um, but I think bass fishing in South Africa is probably a place I would like to go experience. I think I've always heard they've got excellent fishing. They've got some really big fish. And I think it would be really cool to be bass fishing where there's hippos. So I think that now you should be very aware of them and make sure you don't get too close to them. But I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, what food item would you consider to be a staple for a cooler whenever you're packing for a day out on the lake or just any other sort of an outdoor adventure?
Yeah, probably deer sticks. That's something we typically get our deer done up in summer sausage and sticks, and those deer sticks on a boat are just they're on time usually. They got
Okay.
cheese in them, some pepper, and they're on time.
Okay. What is an item that is on your outdoor bucket list that you have the most desire to check off?
It would be a Miriam turkey hunting trip. That's what it would be. So that's like a western thing. I think Montana and maybe Colorado out west are where those Miriam turkeys are. So yeah, going to shoot a Miriam turkey would be pretty cool. I got to shoot a Rio a couple years ago in Texas. It was just a Jake, but it was still it was a Rio nonetheless.
Right.
Um, that was a really cool. So we've just got Eastern turkeys around here. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was expecting, considering your interest in turkey hunting, I was expecting it to be to hit a grand slam
Yeah.
of turkeys with all the different species, but
Well,
but
that would,
still,
yeah. I'll take one at a time for now. So yeah,
I
do
got you.
that grand slam and get all four in a year would be pretty cool too.
Yeah. All right. Bigfoot or Sasquatch? What term are you going with?
Uh,
I mean, we know it's the same
fictional.
thing. Yeah. Some folks call it Bigfoot, some folks call it Sasquatch. Which
Yeah.
word are you going with?
I'll go Bigfoot. If I'm gonna talk about it, it's gonna be Bigfoot. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And you
Bigfoot.
already answered the next part, was does it exist?
Yeah, yeah. Chris Wells will argue with me heatedly about that, but yeah, yeah. Bigfoot, Squatch.
I got you.
I don't think so.
Now, what is an outdoor slang term that you have either had to have someone explain to you that they've said and you didn't know what it meant, or one that you've had to explain its meaning to somebody else?
Outdoor slang term. Huh. I mean, it's hmm. Uh, maybe walking the dog.
Okay.
Like I mean, you throw on a topwater bait and you're walking the dog, and if somebody doesn't know fishing at all, they look at you
Yeah.
like you got two heads at that point. Yeah, walking the
Yeah.
dog. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right. That's kind of like with Chris when I talked to him the other week. His was take me to the hill. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah, everybody knows. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's if you can make it to the hill,
Yeah.
make it up the hill. Yeah.
um, and then just two more, and then I'm gonna let you pick.
Okay.
But so this is where we're getting into our angling specific questions. So first off, if you were to do a bass fishing tournament, what is a rule that you would incorporate that is not necessarily a rule in the MLF or even Bassmaster series now,
A
or one that
rule.
you would change, when you would remove even?
Yeah, there's a lot I would do away with. I don't like rules as a whole. I think that they're generally they're too restrictive. The easy one to pick that would be out the window um, would be referring to not my nitro, but the tracker that's sitting on over there, and that jet boats would be
Mm.
allowed, and that you could use any boat anytime you wanted to. You could fish day one out of a bass boat and day two out of a jet boat if you wanted to.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but yeah, jet motors being completely allowed in all tournaments at any point in time. would be my absolute number one first rule change that I would make.
Okay. I got you. And then the other question that's specific to fishing is if you could only own and use one type of rod and reel setup for the rest of your life, of the following four options, which would you go with?
Okay.
Either bait cast, spinning, spin cast, or fly.
Yeah, I only got one. It'd be a bait caster. Yeah, that there's stuff you can't do with it, but all the rest of those definitely are the most limiting. I think a bait caster, you can fish really small, pretty light stuff on it, all the way up to really big, really heavy stuff. Yeah, I definitely go with the bait caster.
Okay. And what we'll do is I have 15 other questions. So to start out with, give me a number between 1 and 15, and we'll see what you end up with.
Okay, I'm gonna go with one.
Okay. So what outdoors topic, this can be a hobby, a specific creature, animal, plant, place, anything to do with God's creation, basically,
Okay,
or an outdoor hobby, is the most intriguing to you? And we'll say other than fishing, because
okay,
obviously you have a big interest in it,
yeah,
all things angling. So outside of
yeah.
that, what would be your topic?
Other so other tell me the option again. Other hobby,
Uh,
place.
yeah, anything to do with the outdoors or
Okay.
creation.
Okay. Um, I'm not a big kayaker, by any means. Not really a hiker unless I'm going after a turkey. Um, I mean, turkey hunting is the obvious one that comes to mind, and I love a lot of different parts of it. Um, I'm not overly a morning person. It seems like I'm getting a more of a morning person every day. It seems like the older I get, I've become more of one every single day. Um, just a few years ago, not at all. But so I like. It's neat to be in the woods in the dark in the morning and listen and watch everything come to life. Like that to me is a really cool part of turkey hunting and duck hunting. I think that's why I like both of them so well. Not that you can't do that deer hunting because you can, but to me those two is that to me is just a really really cool part of it. But then everything that goes along with turkey hunting and calling them and communicating with them. Um, and I think that's why I like both turkey and duck hunting is got to that do with that communication factor that you're in a sense talking to those birds and trying to get them to do what you want them to do, and they don't a lot of times, and I think that's what makes it fun too.
I got you. All right. And then for the last question, we'll go ahead and let you pick between 2 and 15 now.
How about number 9?
All right. Number 9. What is your favorite? All right. This is favorite song, but it needs to fall in one of two categories. It is either a Christian song or a song that has something to do with the outdoors or nature.
Yeah, Crowder Red Letters.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
great song. Great
yeah.
song.
I like some Crowder Red Letters. That's a good one.
I got you. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate you listening along. And uh, i- if you want to share just how much you have in common with Ott for the audience, feel free to leave a comment in here.
Mhm.
How many of your answers were the same as his? And again, thank you, Ott, for letting me talk with you today. It's been very informative. I've enjoyed it. Uh, and hopefully the folks that have listened have also learned and enjoyed it as well. And best of luck next year in your series.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Jody. No, it's been great, and yeah, thank you again for having me on, and hope we can do this again sometime.
Great. Sounds good.